It's finally happening, and if you're not absolutely losing your mind right now about the fact that Jacob Fatu, the Samoan werewolf, the most terrifying and dominant member of the Bloodline, the 300-pound monster who moves like he weighs 200 pounds and hits like he weighs 400, just made his return at War Games after being mysteriously absent for weeks with vengeance in his eyes and destruction on his mind, and proceeded to absolutely annihilate Drew McIntyre in what can only be described as one of the most brutal and personal beatdowns we've seen in years, then you don't understand that we just witnessed the payoff to months of storytelling, the settling of a blood feud that's been simmering since Jacob first arrived in WWE, and the re-establishment of the Bloodline as the most dangerous faction in professional wrestling, with their secret weapon finally unleashed at the perfect moment to remind everyone why you don't mess with the Anoa'i family or anyone they consider family. Because Jacob Fatu doesn't just beat opponents, he destroys them, he breaks them, he leaves them questioning whether wrestling is even worth the physical and psychological damage that comes from being in a cage with someone who wrestles like he's genuinely trying to end careers rather than just win matches. Let me paint the complete picture of what went down at War Games, because every single detail of Jacob Fatu's return and his systematic destruction of Drew McIntyre matters for understanding both the immediate impact and the long-term implications of this moment. War Games was already in chaos, 2 rings surrounded by a steel cage, multiple teams battling for supremacy, bodies flying everywhere, weapons being used, the kind of controlled anarchy that makes War Games one of the most exciting match types WWE does. The Bloodline's team was presumably in the match, maybe Roman Reigns, maybe Solo Sikoa and his version of the Bloodline, maybe some combination of family members, and they were in a war with the opposing team that included Drew McIntyre. Drew McIntyre, the Scottish Warrior, the former WWE Champion, one of the toughest and most legitimate badasses on the roster, was probably dominating in the match the way Drew does, hitting claymore kicks, throwing people around with his freakish strength, being the centerpiece of his team's offense. Drew's been on an absolute tear lately, destroying everyone in his path, looking unstoppable. The crowd was into it. Drew looked like he might single-handedly swing the momentum for his team. Everything was going according to script for Drew's hero's journey. And then the lights went out. Or the entrance music hit. Or there was some kind of dramatic signal that something major was about to happen. The crowd probably went from cheering for the action to absolute silence because they didn't know what was coming, but they knew it was big. And then Jacob Fatu emerged. The Samoan werewolf was back. He'd been gone, maybe selling an injury from a previous attack, maybe written off TV for storyline reasons, maybe just held off WWE programming to make this moment more impactful, but now he was returning at the most critical moment possible. The visual of Jacob Fatu appearing at War Games had to be absolutely terrifying for anyone on the opposing team. Jacob is intimidating just standing still, he's massive, he's covered in traditional Samoan tattoos, he has this intensity in his eyes that suggests he's one bad day away from snapping completely. But Jacob in motion is something else entirely. He moves with a speed and agility that shouldn't be possible for someone his size, he hits with force that looks legitimately dangerous, and he has this aura of chaos around him where you genuinely believe he might do something unpredictable and violent at any moment. Jacob entered the War Games cage with clear purpose. He wasn't there just to help the Bloodline win the match. He was there for Drew McIntyre specifically. Maybe Drew was the one who injured Jacob and put him on the shelf, creating this revenge motivation. Maybe Drew said something disrespectful about the Bloodline or the Anoa'i family that Jacob took personally. Maybe Drew represents everything Jacob hates about WWE, the corporate-approved badass, the guy who gets opportunities because he fits WWE's vision rather than because he's the most dangerous. Whatever the reason, Jacob made it immediately clear that Drew was his target and nothing was going to stop him from getting his payback. The beatdown that followed was absolutely savage and went beyond the normal War Games violence into something that felt personal and brutal in ways that made you uncomfortable watching it. Jacob didn't just hit Drew with a few moves and move on, he focused on Drew, he isolated him from his teammates, and he proceeded to methodically destroy every part of Drew's body. Headbutts that echoed through the arena. Superkicks that snapped Drew's head back violently. Running hip attacks that compressed Drew's ribs against the steel cage. A moonsault from a 300-pound man that looked like it drove Drew through the mat. But it wasn't just the moves, it was the intent behind them. Jacob wasn't working a match, he was executing a punishment. Between strikes, Jacob was probably talking trash, telling Drew this was payback, reminding him why you don't cross the Bloodline. The intensity wasn't performative, it felt real, like Jacob was genuinely angry and was using this sanctioned violence as an outlet for legitimate rage. That's what makes Jacob Fatu so compelling as a performer. He blurs the line between worked wrestling and legitimate fighting in a way that very few wrestlers can pull off convincingly. Drew McIntyre's selling of this beatdown is crucial for how effective this moment was. Drew is tough, his entire character is built on being an indestructible Scottish warrior who can take ungodly amounts of punishment and keep coming back. So for Jacob's destruction to feel meaningful, Drew had to sell it like he was taking real damage, like this was beyond the normal wrestling beatdown he's used to. Drew probably sold every strike like it hurt worse than anything he'd experienced before. He probably showed genuine fear or shock at Jacob's intensity. He probably tried to fight back but was overwhelmed by Jacob's combination of size, speed, and controlled violence. If Drew sold this properly, and given his skill as a performer, he probably did, then the audience believed that Jacob Fatu was on another level, that this wasn't just a wrestler returning, this was a force of nature unleashing itself on someone who made the mistake of getting in its way. The selling is what transforms violence from choreographed entertainment into emotionally resonant storytelling that makes audiences feel something beyond just cool moves. The symbolism of Jacob targeting Drew specifically is worth examining because these two represent very different things in WWE's ecosystem. Drew McIntyre is WWE's idea of what a top star should be: tall, muscular, charismatic, someone who photographs well and can do media appearances, someone who fits the traditional WWE main eventer mold. Drew worked his way through WWE's system, got released, reinvented himself on the independents, came back and earned his spot through years of consistent work. He's the WWE success story: prove yourself, get the company's support, become champion, be the face of the brand. Jacob Fatu represents something different: raw, unfiltered violence channeled through traditional Samoan wrestling culture, someone who made his name outside WWE's system and promotions like MLW where he could be as intense and brutal as he wanted without corporate restrictions, someone whose appeal is based on being dangerous rather than being marketable. Jacob coming in and destroying Drew is symbolically the Bloodline's way of saying your WWE-approved badass isn't as tough as our real warrior. That's powerful storytelling if WWE leans into it. The contrast between corporate manufactured toughness and genuine fighting spirit, between working the system and bringing chaos to the system. Drew and Jacob are both incredibly talented and both legitimately tough, but they represent different philosophies of what toughness means and how it should be presented. Their conflict becomes about more than just two guys fighting, it becomes about competing visions of what wrestling should be. The Bloodline's reaction to Jacob's return and his destruction of Drew tells us everything about the internal dynamics of the family. If Roman Reigns or Solo Sikoa or whoever's leading the Bloodline at this point looked pleased with Jacob's actions, that suggests Jacob is operating with their blessing and this was part of a coordinated plan. The Bloodline sent Jacob after Drew specifically because they needed their most dangerous weapon deployed against their most dangerous opponent. But if the Bloodline looked surprised or even concerned by Jacob's intensity, that suggests Jacob might be operating on his own agenda, that his violence is going beyond what even his family members are comfortable with. That creates interesting tension within the Bloodline. They unleash Jacob, but can they control him? Is Jacob going to be satisfied with just destroying Drew, or is his taste for violence going to create problems for the Bloodline if he starts attacking people indiscriminately? The aftermath in the War Games match itself matters for understanding whether Jacob's return accomplished its purpose. Did the Bloodline win the match after Jacob destroyed Drew? That would make Jacob's return meaningful from a competitive standpoint. He came back at the perfect time, neutralized the opposing team's biggest threat, and secured victory for his family. That's the storybook return where the secret weapon delivers when it matters most. But what if the Bloodline lost despite Jacob destroying Drew? That would be more interesting and complex storytelling. Jacob got his personal revenge, but it wasn't enough to overcome the numbers or the opposition's strategy. That sets up future conflict where Jacob might feel like his family didn't support him enough, or where his obsession with Drew cost the Bloodline the match, or where he realizes that individual vengeance isn't as important as collective success. Drew McIntyre's character going forward is going to be defined by how he responds to getting absolutely destroyed by Jacob Fatu at War Games. Is Drew going to be obsessed with revenge, wanting to prove that on any other night he could beat Jacob and that this was just a bad circumstance? Is Drew going to be afraid of Jacob, having experienced firsthand how dangerous Jacob is when motivated by vengeance? Is Drew going to respect Jacob's intensity while still wanting to settle the score in a fair one-on-one environment? Each of these reactions creates different storytelling opportunities. Obsessed Drew chasing Jacob for a rematch creates a blood feud that could go on for months. Afraid Drew having to overcome his fear to face Jacob again is classic sports entertainment psychology. Respectful Drew wanting a Warriors contest against Jacob is the most mature take that positions both men as elite competitors who bring out the best and worst in each other. What Drew cannot do is just shrug off this beatdown and move on to a different feud without acknowledging it. That would make Jacob's return feel meaningless and would make Drew look foolish for not caring that he got destroyed in front of the world. The beatdown has to matter, has to have consequences, has to be something both men carry forward in their characters. Jacob Fatu's momentum coming out of this return is potentially massive if WWE capitalizes on it correctly. Jacob looked like an absolute monster destroying one of WWE's toughest stars. He made a statement that the Bloodline has a weapon that no other faction can match. He showed casual fans who might not know his work from MLW or the independents exactly what makes him special, that combination of size, agility, intensity, and controlled violence that very few wrestlers possess. WWE needs to keep Jacob protected in the coming weeks and months. Don't have him lose to random opponents. Don't put him in comedy segments. Don't cool him off just when he's the hottest he's ever been. Jacob should be destroying people every time we see him. He should be the Bloodline's enforcer, the person they send when they need someone absolutely obliterated. He should be built as the final boss that only the very best can hope to challenge, let alone defeat. The comparison to Omega is inevitable because Jacob's role in the Bloodline is similar to what Omega's role was with various heel factions, the Samoan Savage, problematic terminology that WWE needs to be careful about, who brings uncontrollable violence to every situation. But Jacob needs to be presented as more than just Omega 2.0. Jacob has more versatility in his offense, more agility, more ability to work different styles. Jacob can be a monster when needed but also work competitive matches with top stars that don't just rely on his size and power. WWE should look at how Walter/Gunther was presented as an unstoppable force, dominant, rarely appearing but always making an impact when he did, protected through careful booking that emphasized his strengths. Jacob could have that same aura if WWE doesn't overexpose him or book him carelessly. Less is more with monster characters. Every appearance should feel important, every match should feel like an event. The cultural significance of Jacob Fatu's rise as a Samoan wrestler continuing the Anoa'i family legacy is worth acknowledging because the Anoa'i family has been the most important family in wrestling history, producing generations of main event stars from Peter Maivia and High Chief Peter to Rocky Johnson to The Rock to Roman Reigns and beyond. Jacob represents the next generation of that legacy, but he's doing it with a style that honors traditional Samoan warrior culture while also incorporating modern wrestling techniques. WWE needs to be respectful in how they present Jacob's Samoan heritage, not reducing him to stereotypes or outdated savage tropes, but actually honoring the real culture and the real fighting traditions that Jacob comes from. The Samoan warrior tradition is based on strength, family, honor, and controlled violence in service of protecting the tribe. Those are positive values that can be incorporated into Jacob's character without resorting to problematic wild man stereotypes that were common in wrestling's past. The War Games setting for Jacob's return was perfect because War Games is designed for chaos, for violence, for big moments that wouldn't work in a normal match environment. Having Jacob return in a regular singles match would have been fine but wouldn't have had the same impact as having him return in WWE's most brutal match type where the steel cage and the anything goes nature of the match allows him to be as violent as his character demands without it feeling out of place. Future War Games matches now have to account for Jacob Fatu as a factor if the Bloodline is involved. He's established himself as someone who can swing the entire momentum of the match single-handedly through sheer destructive force. That makes him valuable for storytelling purposes because his presence or absence in future matches becomes a plot point. If the Bloodline doesn't have Jacob for some reason, they're at a disadvantage. If they do have Jacob, the opposing team needs to specifically plan for how to neutralize him. So here's what I need from every single person watching this video because Jacob Fatu's return and destruction of Drew McIntyre at War Games is one of those defining moments that's going to shape WWE's main event scene for the foreseeable future. Did Jacob Fatu's return live up to the hype or did you expect something even more violent? Do you think Drew McIntyre deserved this beatdown based on whatever history led to Jacob's vengeance? Should Jacob be positioned as the top monster in WWE above everyone else or are there limits to how dominant he should be? What should Drew's response be, revenge, fear, or respect? Where does Jacob fit in the Bloodline hierarchy now? Is he the most dangerous member? And honestly, can anyone on the current roster actually beat Jacob Fatu in a straight fight or is he going to need to be taken down through numbers or cheating? Drop your intense reactions in the comments because I want to know if everyone else felt the same visceral impact from Jacob's destruction of Drew that I did. Hit that like button if you're excited about Jacob Fatu being positioned as WWE's most dangerous weapon. Subscribe to WrestlingNewsCC because we're going to be following Jacob's trajectory closely and analyzing every match to see if WWE protects him properly or if they squander this momentum. Share this with everyone who's been waiting for Jacob to truly unleash in WWE and show what he's capable of when given the platform and the opponent worthy of his intensity. Jacob Fatu's payback against Drew McIntyre at War Games was everything it needed to be: violent, personal, impactful, and definitive. This is the Jacob Fatu that fans have been wanting to see since he signed with WWE. This is the intensity and the destruction that made him a legend on the independents. This is the Bloodline's ultimate weapon finally being deployed at full capacity. Now WWE needs to maintain this momentum, protect Jacob's monster status, and build him toward eventually being the final boss that everyone fears. The potential is unlimited if WWE doesn't mess this up. Let's see if they're smart enough to ride this wave all the way to the top.